Welcome to the Central Eurasian views, to the series of lectures on Central Eurasian Studies in East Asia and beyond. My name is Timur Dadabaev, and I'm a professor of international relations at the University of Tsukuba, where I'm also privileged to direct the special program for Eurasian countries. We would like to acknowledge that we run this program in partnership with the Nippon Foundation and generous support from it. Today's talk on Central Eurasian views of East Asia, findings from Asian Student Survey of 2018 is part of this series and is last event in February. However, our series are going to continue throughout the year, and our next talk is planned to be conducted on March 7th on reimagining and decolonizing aid by Dr. Nafisa Nsimbaeva, who is a NIPCA, a postdoctoral fellow with the University of Tsukuba, followed by the second event on migration issues in Central Asia that will feature Professor Rustam Urimboyev from Lund University and Dr. Shehrzod Eraliyev, who received his PhD from the University of Tsukuba and is currently a research fellow at the University of Helsinki. This workshop will also feature our own graduate fellows, NIPCA fellows, Manija Rajabova and Ayjan Mohamedjanova as discussants. The series will continue on, and we will keep updating you on the new talks. So please follow us through our Twitter, Facebook, and web channels. For those who missed our previous talks or wants to revisit the talks, I would like to invite you to visit our YouTube channel, where all the talks are uploaded as soon as we complete our online sessions. The structure of our talks is the following. We start with the main speaker delivering the introductory points for about 35 to 40 minutes, and that is then followed by questions and comments from the floor. I will collect several questions at once, and I will try to facilitate several rounds of questions. You can ask your questions personally, or type your questions in the chat box of the Zoom that I will then read out on behalf of you. It gives me a special pleasure to introduce Professor Shigeto Sonoda, who is a professor of sociology at the Institute of Advanced Studies of Asia at the University of Tokyo. Professor Sonoda is known and renowned scholar of sociology, as he initiated several breakthrough studies of public opinions, such as Asia Barometer from 2003-2008, Asia Student Survey from 2008 to 2018, as well as Tianjin Annual Survey of 1997 to 2011. His special interest is in social stratification and globalization of cultures in Asia, as well as international perceptions of Asian societies and countries. Professor Sonoda received his training as sociologist from the University of Tokyo with a regional focus on China. Prior to his current appointment as professor of sociology at the Institute of Advanced Studies of Asia at the University of Tokyo, Professor Sonoda has served as a professor of sociology at the universities of Chuo and Waseda. So without further ado, welcome to the series, Professor Sonoda. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Dadabaev. And I'm very happy to see that Professor Dadabaev is planning to have a kind of serious lectures on the Central Eurasian Studies. And whenever I try to work with him, I'm always astonished by the very speedy actions or reactions to promote a lot of scholarship, including this lecture series. Today, I'm very honored to be here, but I feel a little bit, scared, in a sense, because I'm not so-called authentic expert on Central Asian studies. But because I could have an opportunity to crack the kind of very interesting data from two Central Asian countries, namely Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, I'd like to share the main findings with you. And I do believe that I will gain more than you can gain from my own talk. So I'm very excited to have a kind of exchange ideas how to interpret the data with you as soon as possible. Okay, as Professor Dadabaev explained, my topic today is to have a focus on findings from Asian Student Survey 2018, which is a third wave of the continuous surveys covering Asia. Okay. First of all, I'd like to mention about the kind of increasing importance of of the factor of so-called sentiments, which are regarded as something irrational or sometimes very difficult to deal in a kind of logical explanation of the, let's say, state's behavior in international political arena or and so on. But now, if you look at the kind of in some literature in the international relations, especially the school constructivist approaches, scholars have come to use look at very significant contribution or function of the national sentiments, not only in the state's behavior, but also in different areas of international politics, including the rise of populism or nationalism. So, and sometimes scholars try to look at diplomats, behavior from their emotional or behavioral aspects. So now we see the increasing, some trends of, have a more focus on sentiments, which again it used to be regarded as something little to do with international relations. But when it comes to let's say when it comes to my own expertise, you see that we are witnessing a very long range rise of China, but you can see you can see some irrational or emotional responses from the neighboring countries, and sometimes the logic behind is very different from one country to another. Sometimes people in particular countries worry about aggression by the Chinese military behaviors, but in other countries do not feel such a kind of military threat. So in some areas of Asia, they have a very positive views toward the economic contribution of the rise of China, but in other countries, they try, people try to estimate a little bit lower than the other countries. So, if you look at the topic of the rise of China issue, because perception or views contain some subjective element, so we know that it's really more and more important to look at psychological aspects of international relations. Even within, among Asian countries, we see such a kind of trends, and I sometimes call it as a politicization of international perception. For example, in case of Taiwan, you can see that ruling party and the opposition party, oftentimes have a very different views toward, let's say, China or Japan. In other words, perception of foreign countries has been regarded as a main domestic politics. The same can be said of South Korea as well. And now ruling party is more pro-China, but opposition party is a bit critically looking at such government's attitudes. So sometimes emotions are playing a very vital role even in the domestic political arena. But research in this area is a little bit behind, because of its nature. Previously, such sentiments have been captured by social psychologists who are not necessarily interested in international affairs. But international political scientists, on the other hand, have little pay attention to national sentiments, which are regarded as a residual rather than the main component of international politics. But again, we are in this age. I think we need the more disciplinary approach to understand such phenomena by utilizing different skills and methodologies. Before moving to starting to introduce my own findings, I'd like to mention about two points about increasing about the spread of regional survey. As Professor Dadabaev mentioned, I had an opportunity to work for the kind of Asia Barometer, which was initiated by Professor Inoguchi since 2003. But before his attempt to take initiative in promoting Asia-wide survey, you see that Eurobarometer has been launched since 1974, and as you know, the Eurobarometer has a very good, great contribution to the kind of establishment of the kind of a sense of EU identity. So it's cause and effect. We can see the cause and effect relations between the kind of the spread of regional survey and regionalism or regional community building. Later, Latino barometer has been initiated, followed by Afrobarometer, East Asian Barometer, and Arab Barometer, which was launched in 2006. But when it comes to Central Asia Barometer, it was luckily initiated by in 2012. And if you click this URL, you can go to the kind of website of Central Asia Barometer. And I had an opportunity to have a look at the data set because accessibility of the data is very easy and it basically open to everyone. But one of the disadvantages of using the data of Central Asia Barometer is I think it's quite natural for that barometer to have a focus on Central Asian countries. But I want to, but when it comes to this connection with other part of Asia, the data are lacking. For example, how the Central Asian people are looking at, let's say, East Asia or Southeast Asia. It's rather difficult to get the information by using the data set, collected, by a Central Asia Barometer. And, these barometer are basically, targeted to the political, social behaviors. And, but these, but these questions have a very strong inclination to be a very political one. But international relations are not necessarily created for the political purposes. We have economic, connections. We might have a cultural connections. We might have some personal connections with other countries as well. So it's so in other words, global connections has multi-faced. So it's really difficult to capture such international connections solely by using the data set of a Central Asia Barometer. And this is a rationale of my using Asian Student Survey third wave data. Of course, the biggest limitation of using the survey data is because it lies in the fact that we are just collecting the data from students, which is a very small a component of a total national society. But I should mention about 3 points about the advantages of using Asian Student Survey data, third wave data. First point is a wider coverage of Asian countries, as I mentioned, because I like to focus on Central Asians views of mostly Asia, mostly East Asia. I think it's better to use Asian Student Survey data because it covers more Asian countries' names or connections with Asian societies. And the second point, which I think is more important, is less DK or don't know answers. If you look at the data at the national level, you see a large number of DK answers, which might spoil the quality of the data. But when it comes to students, of course, you can see, in some questions, the percentage of DK exceed 1/3, 33%. But all in all, the DK answers are smaller in number compared with the Central Asia Barometer. And finally, Asian student survey data covers wider range of questions concerning social life, including whether students have a kind of foreign friends from particular countries, or whether they have an intention to go abroad to get the kind of a master's degree or PhD degree. Of course, these networks are very much material one, and it's really difficult to put that questions in the kind of national level survey. But when it comes to a student survey, because we try to cover some direct connections, connections with foreign countries or foreign people, we can see, we can get a more bigger picture how Euro-Asian students has a connection with other parts of the world. And this is the outline of Asian student survey. The first wave was conducted in 2008. The second, and if, we try to have a kind of each survey after 5 years interval. And it's only in third wave that we had an opportunity to include Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. The sampling method is not a kind of a random sampling because of difficulty to get access to total population of students. Even at the University of Tokyo or University of Tsukuba, you cannot get the whole population of the students because each list has been managed by each school. So we use a kind of allocation method to create the same number from male and female, from natural sciences measure, as well as arts and social science measure, and we try to get the equal number from different grades. So we control such kind of sampling scheme, in order to compensate the kind of deficiencies or difficulties of correction of data by using as a random sampling method. So from each university we try to crack 200 samples, but still you might say that the number of 200 is small, but I found that the number is enough to get some rough picture what's going on. If possible, as far as I could do, I try to compare, Uzbekistan's data and Kazakhstan's data to be compared with other part of Asia. This is the participants who are the members of the third wave project. When it comes to the collection of data in Uzbekistan, I asked Dilunoda-san, who used to be my student at the University of Tokyo, to collect the data. And when it comes to the Kazakhstan, I asked Sabina-san, on your right button, to collect the data. So, if we had the kind of enough money, we might have used research company to collect more data, but because of limitation of budget, and because but mostly because of educational purposes of these young students, I closely work with the PhD, mostly PhD students, to crack the data and to analyze the data to gain very important findings from 3 waves of Asian student survey. Then the mission, as you know, the mission of today's talk is to capture the so-called national sentiments of Uzbek students and Kazakh students, especially in its connection to East Asian societies. Then how? The biggest challenge is how to operationalize national sentiments. Of course, it's really difficult to make an operational definition of a sentiment, but here I prepared roughly 2 categories of the sentiments, and then the first category is perceptions or psychological perceptions, which is a very imaginary, sometimes very imaginary and subjective, but still there. And the second category is social distance. But when it comes to social distance now, you see some physical distance, especially under the COVID-19, you must be very sensitive to the social distance. But here, the social distance means rather cultural or psychological distance. For example, whether they have any network or friendship with particular country, or they have any affiliation, a sense of a closeness to particular language, because a language is a tool to communicate. So I prepared several, three questions. One is about friendship. Secondly, language acquisition or expectation to language acquisition for the next generation, and thirdly, whether the students have any intention to go abroad, which countries they want to go, or what sort of companies they want to work for. But of course, these network is a very has a very material dimension. So in the perception, as I mentioned, perception has to do with the image, or sometimes image has been created by the mass media, or sometimes image has been created by personal contact with some students, and sometimes you get information from SNS and so on. But I'd like to divide the kind of sentiment into perceptions and social distance to see what sort of characteristic we can find from two Central Asian countries, namely Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. Before moving into the kind of a core part, I'd like to share with you some very interesting findings about the kind of research. First of all, I asked the all the informants in Asian universities about the image of Asia they have, and I prepared several dichotomies, and prepared the 7-point scale. What sort of image they have when they hear the concept of Asia. Here you see the kind of dichotomy, let's say the dirty versus clean, stagnant versus developing, young versus old, static versus dynamic, homogeneous versus heterogeneous, safe versus dangerous. The left side shows a smaller number, and the right side shows a larger number. And of course, the medium is 4. And the green line shows the total score, covering other Asian society as well, including China, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and so on. One of the, if you try to see, compare Uzbekistan's and Kazakhstan's answer with the total pattern, you see that Uzbekistan students have to imagine, Asia as somewhat old but dynamic. Interesting, old but dynamic. But when it comes to Kazakhstan, the image is slightly closer to the total pattern. But what I wanted to do is not to analyze the image, but the following questions. I put the kind of this question in the beginning of a 12-page long questionnaire. But the second following question is, which countries belong to the Asia you had imagined? So I asked what sort of, imagining map of Asia. And I listed up, 39 countries' name. And I asked each student to choose whether these countries are imagined as a part of Asia when they're asked about the image of Asia. This is a picture of Uzbekistan. I believe that Dadabaev sensei might have the first look at this picture. There is some tendency among Asia that so-called a kind of gravity model can be applied to that kind of emerging scope of Asia. Well, let's say in case of Japan, Japan is most frequently imagined by the Japanese students when they hear the concept of Asia. The same can be said of South Korea, China, Thailand, Myanmar, and so on. So they might think the country is a part of Asia, but you can see some gradual difference. And that kind of pattern can be witnessed even to two Central Asian countries, including Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. For example, here you see that Uzbekistan's here. The largest number of Uzbek students picked up Uzbekistan when they're asked to choose whether these countries are listed as a kind of emerging Asia. Followed by the Kyrgyzstan. And when it comes to other Southeast and East Asian countries, China got about 70% answer, but you see some slight difference between North Korea and South Korea. And South Korea and Japan shows very similar pattern. But when it comes to Southeast Asian countries, those who imagine these countries are relatively rare, except Thailand and Malaysia. And I think that Malaysia seems to be slightly different from other part of Southeast Asian countries in terms of the number of students who chose the country as a part of emerging Asia. And the second, this is a map of Kazakhstan. Well, interestingly, China's presence seems to be slightly larger, compared with Uzbekistan, but we can see the same pattern, when it comes to South Korea and Japan. China is, China's presence is slightly heavier than South Korea and Japan, in both Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. And, we see very similar pattern. Thailand, Malaysia are relatively, more frequently referred, emerging when they hear the concept of Asia. But Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam, which are regarded as a rather few, big countries in South Asia, are not well recognized by the kind of Kazakhstani students. Now we are looking into a more substantial aspect of perceptions. I prepared 5-point scale, ranging from 1 to 5. Please keep in mind that the larger the number is, the worse evaluation they have in terms of their estimated influence onto their society. So as in Afghanistan, the score is over 3 points, meaning that most of the students in 2 countries are looking at Afghanistan in a more, from a bit negative aspect. But when it comes to other countries, you see, it's really difficult to see some patterns, except Russia. Russia's score is lowest, in Uzbekistan. Japan, South Korea also received relatively better, image. But China, when it comes to China, you see a difference between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. Well, as you remember, the Kazakhstan's, students imagine China when they heard the concept of Asia. But when it comes to the image, well, the score is slightly, bigger compared with other countries. But when it comes to other, Asian societies, the answer is very much scattered. But I'd like to have a more close look at what sort of a distribution of answers are there. Now you see, I prepared, I picked up 11 countries to see and to have a more complete look at the kind of distribution of answers. For example, when it comes to the student evaluation to the Australians' influence to the societies, around 28% answer DK, don't know, meaning that they have still a kind of a psychological or physical distance between them and Australia. But when it comes to US, even though US is, look at a little bit far away, but evaluation is inclined to be more positive. Okay, more than half, more than around 60% of them have a positive, image towards US influence. The same can be said to Russia. And this is one of the uniqueness of the Central Eurasian countries. If you look at, let's say, Southeast Asian countries, you see a very positive image toward the US, but relatively negative image toward Russian influence, except China. But when it comes to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, the positive image toward the US and Russia coexist together, which is very different from other part of Asia. when it comes to Southeast Asian countries, Malaysia, Singapore, the answer, of course, basically the answer is inclined to more positive, but the number of don't know, occupies a little bit larger portion. In case of Afghanistan, you see, that pattern, but still, the answer, DK answer is around, 50, it's over 15%. This is the main part, East Asia. Well, you see, you see a very different, very similar pattern between Japan and South Korea, and you see the very, very similar patterns over different items as well. So even though the Japanese scholarship, hardly work with the Korean scholars to understand Central Asian countries. But when it comes to Central Asia's views of Japan and South Korea, we see very similar patterns. But interestingly, I think this pattern is very similar to the other part of Asia. But you see a huge difference between evaluation to South Korea and North Korea. Especially in Southeast Asian countries, you see such a huge difference between between South Korean's perception and North Korean perception. But as I said, China shows very similar pattern when it comes to the evaluation to North Korea and South Korea. But I sometimes use the logic of socialist legacy to understand such pattern. But when it comes to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, probably that logic cannot be applied because these countries are post-socialist countries. But we still see a huge difference between the South Korea's image and North Korea's image. And here is the image of China, or the evaluation to the Chinese influence onto society. Kazakhstan is slightly worse. If you look at this part, I mean, rather bad influence and bad influence, a quota of the students in Kazakhstan chose these negative answers, while Uzbekistan shows, relatively smaller portion. So you see, some patterns here. But what about the kind of historical trends? Of course, in order to chase the historical trends, it's better for us to use the chronological data. But as I mentioned, Asian Student Survey was, in Asian Student Survey, we collected the data only once in 2018. So it's really difficult to chase the historical changes. So, I use Asia Barometer's data, which collected in 2005 to show, to tell you whether or how, you can see the changes of evaluations throughout particular countries. I choose the kind of, I just picked up the kind of, the segment of total population of Asia Barometer, meaning that I chose, or I just focus on the samples of those who are in 20s. Of course, in order to secure the comparability. If you look at Russia in 2008 and 2018, the pattern doesn't show any great difference. But when it comes to US, you see a huge difference. In 2005, you see, especially in Kazakhstan, more than 40% of the respondents chose, bad influence or very bad influence here. But when it comes to the 2008 Asian Student Survey data, the portion, shrinked a lot. And the same can be said to Uzbekistan's data. So when it comes to Russia's evaluations, very constant and very, and it's not changing. But when it comes to US, change a lot. And interestingly, the pattern can be witnessed in 2-3 East Asian countries. Japan. Well, Japan used to, had a kind of relatively better image compared with the US, but you see some gradual betterment of the kind of evaluation. But more drastic changes can be seen in South Korea, especially in Kazakhstan. More than half of the Kazakhstan, youngsters chose, neither good nor bad influence or a neutral answer. But now, but 2018, you see a more positive answers here. Uzbekistan, previously, Uzbekistan's image of South Korea was better. The pattern also showed a very similar pattern in 2018. So when, especially in Kazakhstan, you see a drastic betterment of the image of South Korea. China as well. But at this time, you see the change of Uzbekistan's case. Here, around 40% of the youngsters in 2005 showed rather positive evaluation. But now, you see more than 70% shows positive answer. So if you look at in detail, historically, chronologically, you see some very interesting changes over time. Then what about the political leaders in different parts of the world? Now then we see some larger number of DK answers. Well, let's say, Uzbekistan students, Kazakhstan students has a very positive image about the country of South Korea. But when they ask about, the evaluation to the Moon Jae-in, the current president of South Korea, around 30% said, don't know. The same can be said to the Abe Shinzo, former prime minister of Japan. But still the Xi Jinping, 20% of them said, oh, don't know. But so interestingly, Trump shows relatively smaller portion of don't know answer. And one of the biggest difference between two countries with other part of Asia is rather positive evaluation to Donald Trump, as well as super positive evaluation to Vladimir Putin. If you look at the kind of other Asian society countries data, you see, especially in the Philippines, Trump received a very bad image. The same can be said to Putin. When it comes to Moon Jae-in, only Japanese students had a very negative image. But when it comes to Abe Shinzo, only South Korean students showed a very negative answer, followed by Xi Jinping. But the students in these countries up to have a look at they try to look at the national leaders very positively, which is very different from Japan. You see the youngsters in Japan are relatively negatively looking at Abe Shinzo. But when it comes to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, they look at the kind of national leaders more positively. And finally, we still have several slides to go. This is a very interesting question, which I put in only in the third wave data. I listed up several countries and I asked the students which country is regarded as a model of economic development for their own society. And I expected that the answer will be concentrated on some particular countries. But you see, the pattern is very much, but the distribution is very much scattered. In case of Uzbekistan, the larger number, around 30, about a third of the, about the third students, answered US. Interesting. Even though, but when it comes to Russia, just 3.8%. But when it comes to, Kazakhstan, China, Japan, occupies about 70%. So you see, very people, different students have different ideas about the model. Then what about the views of right of China? I try to compare, two countries, Central Asian countries, the other part of Asia. I prepared several sentences and I asked them what sort of ideas they have. This figure 6.1 shows the different attitudes to the statement that the right of China offers us a lot of opportunities. Vietnam, Japan shows relatively lower percentage, but when it comes to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, even though there's a relatively larger number of DKs here, but all in all, the answers are positive. And the possibility to change the relation with the country due to the rise of China, very similar pattern. Japan, Taiwan, South Korea. These Southeastern countries are very sensitive to the changing nature of the bilateral relation with China. But still, Uzbekistan students and the Kazakhstan students shows relatively larger number of DK here. This is much more interesting because we are discussing, especially the Japanese experts on international relations, picked up two countries to estimate, what's going on about the, Belt and Road Initiative. And of course, in a very, in many, scholarship, the Japanese scholar says that the BRI is one of the tools to change the global order initiated by China. But when it comes to students in these two societies and countries, those who disagree is relatively larger in Uzbekistan, but in case of Kazakhstan, the ideas, the opinions are divided. And also, the future prospect of the peaceful relations in Asia, it also shows, interesting pattern. When it comes to other countries, let's say South Korea, Vietnam, Philippines, Japan, Taiwan, which has a kind of territorial issues with China, are very, very skeptical about so-called, a peaceful rise of China. But when it comes to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan students, of course, in spite of the larger number of decades here, but still all in all, the image is positive. Okay, these are the four findings in terms of perceptions. One, when it comes to Russia, a very affirmative, continuous affirmative attitudes are there, historically. But but it's not. But previously, Russia received extraordinarily positive image, but now you see the increasing positive views of U.S. So you see the reasons later, but one of the uniqueness of the two Central Asian countries is that there is a coexistence between positive image of Russia as well as positive image of U.S. Then what about the South Asian countries? I'd like to point out 2 points. When it comes to Japan and South Korea, image, evaluation to the society and these two countries become more positive, but still, some distance are there. For example, political leaders, many, more than quarter of the respondents answered DK. About China, increasing opportunities, but less, they are feeling less threatening, global order. Which is slightly different from the main argument in the West on the kind of impact of BRI. Okay, I have to make hurry. I'll prepare additional slides to show some interesting characteristic of social social distances. We ask whether the students have any friends in particular countries, and score ranges from 1 to 3. 1 means they have friends in these countries. 2, they have only acquaintances in these societies. 3, they don't have any friends nor acquaintances. So the larger the number is, the thinner their social network are there. If you look at the score, it's quite evident Russia is very exceptional in its very close distance. Of course, you see friends in their society, but you see interesting patterns. Then what about Southeast Asia? Japan here, South Korea here. Probably Uzbekistan has more acquaintances, from South Korea, but not so much in Kazakhstan. Well, Japan, in spite of the good image, but connection with friends in Japan is very weak. Then what about the destination of study abroad? You see again a very interesting picture. Here you see a group of countries which are very seem to be very attractive to these society, two societies of Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. US most popular, followed by UK and Canada. And then when it comes to other part of Asia, Australia is more popular than other than the two Central Asian societies, but somewhat in between. Japan is located here, South Korea located here. So those show some two means a little bit interest. So they are not so the score is in between. And the same can say to the Singapore. This is very typical. You can see the very similar pattern in other part of Asia. In the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, these three societies, South Korea, Japan, and Singapore, are three popular destinations. But interestingly, China here. So even though they understand the importance of China, and especially when it comes to Kazakhstan, the students perceive China's presence is bigger, but when it comes to their connection with their personal life or personal benefit, China is not regarded as a promising area, country to go to. But these, other, Southeast Asian countries are hardly imagined as an ideal destination to study abroad. The same can say to the other Central Asian societies, including Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and so on. So neighboring countries are not regarded as a kind of ideal destination, but this pattern, this triple structure, seems to be very common across Asia. So English-speaking advanced societies are regarded as a very ideal destination. And again, we see a very interesting picture about the language acquisition. The left side shows a kind of current language acquisition, the proficiency. The one score 1 shows fluent, in score 4, no commands at all. So the larger the number is, the less proficient these languages are. Russian, very exceptional, followed by English. But when it comes to expectation, meaning I ask students, let's say after 18 years of their birth of their child, if your child asks you to choose foreign language, which language you recommend. So it's not about themselves, but it's a result of the expectation, or anticipation, for about the kind of about 20 or 30 years later. English dominates, followed by Russian. Then what about the East Asian languages? Here, Japanese and Korean. Here, and Japanese Koreans. When it comes to, again, it's a very similar pattern. When it comes to the reality, those who have a good command of Chinese are very scarce. But their expectations of Chinese is a little bit bigger than Japanese and Korean. Now you see that the Dadabaev sensor is very exceptional in the sense of his having a high proficiency of Japanese. But when it comes to the expectation, Japanese language is not competitive with Russian language or English language. So these are the realities. And finally, this is the last slide, which has to do with the dialect interest of them. I picked up, I prepared several categories of companies, and I asked the students which company they want to work for after their graduation from the program. The distribution is, again, very scared. When it comes to South Korea, Japan, and China, this part dominates more than half. But when it comes to South Korea, only quarter of the respondents chose their own country, the company or organizations. But the answers are more focused on these 2 points. American company or European countries here. What about Japanese company? Kazakhstan, just 5.5%, Uzbekistan just 4.5%. Korean company is more popular in Uzbekistan, 7.4%, but it's not bigger than it's not compared. It's not but it's a smaller number compared with American company, European companies. What about Russia? Only 1% in Kazakhstan and less than 5% in Uzbekistan. So it's this is again an interesting finding. Even though at the country level, the students in these countries have a very attach a very positive image to Russia, but when it comes to the selection of their career, those who choose kind of a Russian company is not dominating. Okay, these are the findings. Different close relationship Russian and US. Two dynamism of social network and desire of future career. When it comes to social network, Russia is the closest, as of now. But when it comes to the desirable destination of study abroad or desirable workplace, US dominates. So you see, even though the positive image of Russia and US coexist, but the direction or the nature seem to be slightly different from each other. Secondly, South Korea and Japan seem to be in a very intermediate position in terms of the preference or the image they have. When it comes to the country level, they have a good image. But when it comes to the kind of language acquisition or study abroad program, of course, they would not deny of the kind of positive aspect of going to these countries, but not so super. But the evaluation is not so good compared with US and the UK. And the same can be said to China. They are looking at the future of China more positively, and they are expecting that China will be giving them more opportunities. But still, a personal network is scarce, is very scarce, and they expect, and a very small number of students want to go to China for study, and the number of those who aspire to work for Chinese company is still limited. So you see some ideal situation. So this is a kind of results of the findings. Some implications. I prepare 3 points for international politics. You see some unique geopolitical aspect of Central Eurasian countries. And secondly, I do think that the Dadabaev sensei has used a kind of part of the Asian survey to write a kind of a migration studies paper. And I think we can use the data to understand what's going on, what will happen if more students or more people from Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan move to Southeast Asia. And finally, international management study will get benefit by using that kind of data. Even because of the limitation of time and space, I didn't prepare the data. But when it comes to the unique characteristic of the students in two countries of Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, the expectation toward the opportunity for promotion is regarded as a very important factor when they choose the company they work for, which is very much different from other part of Asia. But anyway, as I mentioned, I'm not an expert of Central Asian societies. So I really welcome your comments to make a better interpretation of the data that I presented today. Thank you very much for your patient listening to my poor presentation.
Thank you very much, Sonoda Sensei. This is a really fascinating talk, and the findings actually pave so many different sort of traits and directions of research that can be pursued. In that particular sense, I would like to emphasize that this data by itself is a wealth that we can use for further inquiries. Also, in the chat box, I've provided the title and the link for the paper, which is just published last year in Central Asian Survey, which used part of this survey for the analysis of migration flows in Central Asia and beyond. Now, let me collect few questions. I'll collect several rounds. I'll collect by around 3 questions first, and then we'll go from there. Nafisa, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Sonoda, for sharing the findings of your large-scale grand research. I want to take advantage of the fact that you're an expert on China and ask you about how is conducting research and specifically collecting data through surveys in China different from doing so in Japan? And like, what are some of the unique challenges and opportunities of conducting research in that context? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll collect a few more questions. I have in the chat box, I think I have, Sabina, would you like to ask your question? Would you like me to read it?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Professor, for this fantastic talk. I have a question about research methods. So we know that you have a rich experience in conducting sociological research, conducting surveys, and so on. So can you please tell us more about the methodological problems of doing field work in authoritarian or non-democratic context, not necessarily only in Central Asia, and how did you normally overcome them? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, some of the things I would like to ask also to take advantage and ask you, just clarifying questions. The first thing is that, I noticed you talked about don't know answers. And I think, in the sort of conventional research, this would be disregarded and, regarded as a spoiling research. But I remember, from Asia Barometer survey, for majority of these Central Asian countries, we had don't know answers for majority of politically connected questions. So I'm just wondering, could we, which we did partly in Asian Barometer, but I thought, could don't know answers be the indicator also that could be used for analysis, although, it's not a very conventional sort of way of usage. And the second sort of connected question would be, so, this survey results, they talk about images projected on on other countries, but it seems to me there is a lot which also speaks about, the image of the self. For instance, I was quite surprised to find out, the answers about the model of development by Japanese students. I looked and, I see that, it provides this, the images for Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, where you have China and many other, Singapore, etc. But then, I was quite surprised to see that, there is a quite significant number of the Japanese students seeing China as a possible sort of way of development. And to be honest, I think, it needs to be connected not only to what they see in China, but also what they see in Japan, what they don't like in Japan. So I'm wondering, if this perception of self can also be integrated into this analysis of this data. Thank you. So these are the 3 questions. I will collect 3 more, afterwards. So please prepare your questions. Okay. I already see a few, raise hands. Someone say, please go ahead.
Okay. So, okay, thank you very much for your interesting questions. When it comes to the kind of research in China, actually, I worked with my Chinese students, who are now in the master PhD program in my university. We have a close discussions how to make a kind of good interpretations and so on. But one of the the unexpected event, episode that we have is that because the Shanghai students use the country when they ask about the image of Taiwan. The students in mainland, especially in Shanghai, Fudan University in Shanghai, Chado University, made a very heavy claim that Taiwan is not a country. But when you do do the research in other part of Asia, nobody puts the question about this, because as you know, the Taiwan issue is so sensitive, politically sensitive in China. So my students had difficulty in persuading the students to fill in the questionnaire once they become very fierce about they're looking at the kind of expression of country. When they're asking the Taiwan's influence on this and China, but when it comes, accessibility to students, very paradoxically, China is much easier for us to crack the data because they have a kind of a dormitory, and many students are studying hard in library. So if you go to the dormitory at night or library in daytime, you can easily get access to students. But when it comes to other part of Asia, it's rather difficult to get the kind of student samples because, as I mentioned, I use a kind of same sampling scheme to correct the equal number of gender, measure, and grade. So we try to check how many samples we could correct. So let's say sometimes we are in need of more, let's say, male students in the 3rd grade measuring arts and science, arts and social sciences. But we have to seek for where are students there. But when it comes to China, because of that easy accessibility of students, we could smoothly manage the procedure of the research. But probably the first question has to do with the second question about the possible difficulty of conducting research in authoritarian regimes. And actually, when it comes to the Uzbekistan part, Dirunoda-san had a close contact with me to distribute a questionnaire because when we try to distribute a questionnaire, the easiest one is to use a classroom, to get a kind of permission from the professor to distribute a questionnaire to the students after the class is over. But if the professor feels a little bit, scared to allow, questionnaires to be distributed, then they will say, no, get out of from the kind of classroom. Dirunoda-san seem to have some difficulty in going to the classrooms. Mostly, getting a kind of a permission from a professors, more difficult part of the correction of the data. And the same can be said to the Kazakhstan. The one challenges in correction of the data in authoritarian countries is to get permission. But once the students, our research partner can get access to the students, well, well done. Because the students are students. Of course, some students are very hesitating to answer the question, especially to the politically sensitive questions. But we ask our partner to say that if they think that it's really difficult to answer, they can make it blank or choose DK answer. That's a kind of instruction that I did to my local partners. So the accessibility to the students, well, through the introduction of the professors, or allowance of the professors, might be one of the most challenging part of conducting researches under authoritarian regime. But other part, when it comes to the contents of the questionnaires, I don't think any inconveniences are there. The third question raised by Dadabaev-san is about the meaning of DK. Yes, DK is a very complex, very complicated item. Sometimes it just simply means that they are lacking knowledge or lacking experience. But sometimes they say, because they hesitate to answer, first due to time, but they want to spare time, so they want to say, okay, don't know, like this. But those people try to make the kind of answers blank. But a blank answer is not categorized as DK answer. So the DK is the data shows those who chose DK intentionally. And of course, in many cases, DK shows that they understand the situation very much, as a very complex phenomenon. So they are not make a very simplified answer. So they choose, in that sense, they might choose a kind of DK. But I sometimes ask our students to ask why they chose DK, if time allows. And in many cases in Central Asia, I got some report that DK was made when they simply are lacking in information or imagination. But of course, the number of interview like this is limited. So it's quite possible that political correctness has something to do with the number of DK answers. But when it comes to the kind of international perceptions or perception toward particular countries, let's say in case of Russia or China, the number of DK is very small number. But when it comes to Australia or Southeast Asian countries, we see a very large number. Meaning, I'm not sure whether a particular country is particularly politically sensitive in terms of, when it's in its connection with the number of DK answers. But again, interpretation of DK is something to be done more seriously. But I tentatively use a number of DKs to show some distance. But of course, in order to prove it, we have to make a good operationalization of the distance. That's all that I can answer to Professor Dadabaev's questions.
And so what about the image of self? So, the data speaks about, the image of others, but
that's a really good point. That's really good point. And I try to find why, some part of the Japanese students chose China. And I check the kind of, their characteristic to find that those who are in natural sciences, chose, China as a model of economic development. And when it comes to Japan portion, we have a kind of opportunity to conduct an interview of 30 students, 15 from arts and social sciences, and the rest 15 from natural sciences. Natural science students, they are very, very much criticized about Japanese government policy towards e-commerce or transactions. But they are up to look at China as a model for using internet devices to commercial, administration or economic transactions. And yes, this so the figure the figure of the score of model economic development is a mixture of the evaluation to the targeted countries as well as themselves. Yes, that's a really good point. And as you see, that the image of Asia is also, as you say, the reflection of their evaluation to the other Asian society as well as their own country. And that's one of the reasons why their country is often most often reminded when they hear the concept of Asia, everywhere in Asia.
Yeah, because thank you. Actually, when I saw this image of power, these powerful leaders, and then you provided this image that in Philippines there's so much negative attitude to Trump. I think perhaps many of these Filipino students have this image of their own leadership, and so they project this on Trump.
Definitely.
Thank you very much. Now let me collect a few more questions. Manija, go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Sonoda, for this presentation. It was really interesting, and some of the results were quite surprising for me. Tajikistan. Actually, what I wanted to ask regards the COVID situation, the current situation. You have mentioned that one of the effective ways to, share the questionnaires is actually go to the classrooms and ask permission from the professors to share the questionnaires with the students. However, in the COVID pandemic, what I personally noticed is that all kinds of the face-to-face connections, including going to the university and asking permission to share a questionnaire or conduct an interview, it became more challenging because people are afraid of the COVID spread and things related to that. So my question would be, what is the main challenges for a researcher in the process of data collection if we're taking the COVID pandemic in regards, and what are the most effective ways to overcome them?
Oh, very difficult question.
Thank you. Let me collect a few more questions if we have any. Please go ahead. Sabina, yes, and Nafisa, I see. So Sabina, go ahead first, and then I'll ask Nafisa.
Thank you very much. So I was surprised by the positive images of South Korea. So I was wondering whether it is somehow connected to the spread of this K-pop wave, because the surveys were the survey was conducted among the university students. Thank you.
Okay, Nafisa?
Yes, I just had a quick follow-up question about whether you think that the gender of the people who are conducting the surveys, of the principal investigator as well as the assistants, somehow affects the responses in the surveys. Thank you.
Would you specify, your question? You mean that females researchers might lead more positive image for a particular country? Was
in any way that maybe you've observed some trends, because I know that sometimes in different contexts, if the principal investigator, for example, is a man, then the research is taken more seriously. And if the research is conducted by a woman, then, depending on what values these people hold, they may not be as serious or truthful in the responses. So I was wondering whether you've actually seen something like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have 3 questions. Someone Sensei, go ahead.
Okay, as to the first question about the kind of the biggest challenges, of the collection of data. Yes, actually, as I said, especially the Noda-san in Uzbekistan had difficulty in getting a permission from the professors, and that's why she tried to, intentionally try to create a kind of, people-to-people, connection. So that's why she, I try to share the kind of screen to tell you how long she used. Right, when it comes to Uzbekistan, Noda-san has used one month, even though she promised to come back to Japan within 2 weeks. So she, planned to use 2 weeks to crack 400 data from 2 universities. But the length of stay was twice as long as she expected because of the difficulty of getting permission. So she utilized her own personal network. In the initial stage, as I mentioned, using a classroom is the most efficient way. But as I told you, let's say if you go to one classroom, almost all the students are are the same, might be same disciplines, whether it be natural sciences or humanities or social sciences. But in order to get the kind of more, diversified samples, we have to go to different places like a dormitory or shops or libraries or canteens and so on. Didn't have to spend a lot of time to utilize our network, personal network, to get approach to the students. And one of the ways to overcome such difficulties is to use internet again. Using internet is becoming more and more in fashion. But again, as long as you have a kind of the personal information of the potential informants, you can do so. For example, a very typical case of a kind of internet, opinion poll is to use registered user of some platform. But it's really difficult to get to use such platform to get access to the students. Of course, if I closely work with the professor who can get access to such student platform, then the collection of data might be much easier. But when it comes to the kind of partnership with Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, because of my limitation of the personal network, I couldn't find good research partner there. So that's why I asked my younger female scholars to go there and utilize who utilize their own personal network to collect the information. But when it comes to other part of Asia, it's becoming more and more common to use smartphone to get the kind of information. But still, some autocratic societies are checking, internet, services, which might be a kind of hindrance or obstacles to crack the data online. And second point is about the kind of positive image of South Korea. Yes, K-pop has a huge impact. And now today we have a look at the kind of two Central Asian societies case, but we see the very drastic betterment of the image of South Korea also in Southeast Asia, not in East Asia but Southeast Asia, especially in Philippines and Vietnam, where the popular culture spreads, K-pop spreads very rapidly, and the same can be said to the Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan as well. The third question is very tricky. I haven't thought of some gender impact on the different attitudes. But of course, some questions might have some gender bias. But about when it comes to the kind of, let's say, the image of, let's say, the variation to the influence from particular countries, you see, when it comes to the kind of part, I see, when it comes to the other part, the Taiwan has conducted by male, Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, but I didn't, feel any, obstacles or merits of using male researcher or female researchers when it comes to this research. But definitely some questions about gender, gender related questions, let's say family issues and so on, probably the impact of the gender of principal investigator might have an impact. But I'm sorry, I'm not sure whether this is really the case of this Asian Student Survey third wave.
Thank you very much. We are almost at the end. We have one follow-up question from Jasur. It's about your view on how coming from your survey, what are the what do you think what Japanese government can do or Japanese universities need to attract students from Central Asia? So yeah, Yamamoto Sensei, go ahead also.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Sonoda. It was such a wonderful presentation. Since we have a lot of students listening today, so I like to ask some technical question about the collecting data. I see that the participant of the student to the survey were from relatively prestigious university in both Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan as well. So my question is that in order to use the collected data for comparative study in the future, what are the points that you pay attention when selecting the sampling based, the university students in your grant survey? And then my second part of the question, if you have a time, how important it is to go back to the participant or pool basis to find some explanations or the validation of your analysis. And do you have any plans to do that in the future? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sabina, did you?
I just want to add, replying to Nafisa's questions, while conducting this service, we didn't experience any difficulties as researchers conducting this surveys.
From the gender perspective?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, after the gender case, I didn't hear any report that particular gender, a man or female, has an impact on the kind of results. Luckily or unluckily. And that's, so the second question about what the Japanese government university have to do. It's really difficult to answer, but I think it's better for Japanese university and government to think that country image is very good, and make the best use of that country image by providing the students from the Central Asia students with more concrete, more direct information to them. For example, as I mentioned, the majority of students in two countries highly respect opportunities of promotion when it comes to the selection of a company. But if Japanese companies or governments can successfully make a good advertisement to the students in these societies, then they might be interested in coming to Japanese universities or joining Japanese companies. But when let's say when it comes to Taiwan, which shows which is most positive country when it comes to the evaluation to Japan as a country, but students shows little interest in joining Japanese companies as far as Asian Student Survey is concerned, because they understand that the country is country, but the company is company. But I'm not sure whether the students in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan has such an idea of separation between country and company. But I guess still the kind of image is a little bit broad. It's very combined. So one way is to use a good image of country, and then promote the kind of provide good information about Japanese companies. Otherwise, I think it's promotion is a really good. It's a mission for government and universities. But I think this is something that I can do. Finally, Yamamoto Sensei, thank you very much for the points. The reason why I chose the kind of so-called flagship universities in Asia is because of course if the budget allowed, I'd like to collect the information more. But because of a lot of resources, we intentionally pick up the flagship universities because they are the centers of production, reproduction of national or local leaders. They might be showing the future direction of the society, the countries that we surveyed. For example, when it comes to China, even in Southeast Asian countries like Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore, which has a relatively positive image of China, but you see very few number of students willing to go to China for study. Then it shows but many of them say that the U.S. will be taken place as a global leader by China. The question is it really possible to see such a power shift? Because on one hand, students understand as a country, at the country level that China is growing, but individually they don't want to go to China. But they don't have any willingness to work for Chinese company. Then what will happen? So we can, after correction of the data, we see what will happen in the future. So we can imagine what will happen by using that data. And this is a kind of points that Asian Student Survey has merits. But of course, even within one country, you see non-flagship universities. And you can see some difference in terms of the language acquisition or aspiration for the companies. And of course, even in the perception to other different countries, they might have their own different views. Many, let's say I have many, friends in Taiwan who criticize my, correction only from two universities. They claim, oh, these two universities cannot represent Taiwan. And I received the same criticism from Thailand, especially Chulalongkorn. Is said to have a much Chinese descendants, which have different views towards China. But my response to them is that okay, that's your your mission to increase the number, to show the difference between flagship universities that we collected from which we collected the data, and the rest of the universities that you are most interested in. In order to have a much wider views of Asia, I intentionally focus on flagship universities intentionally. But of course, that's turn out to be the kind of the demerits or weak points of the survey, because each data cannot represent country. But in order to secure the comparability, I thought it's better to focus on flagship universities. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you very much for interesting questions, and I enjoyed a lot.
So Sensei, thank you very much for your time. We are far beyond the time that we managed.
Sorry for
to finish. No, it was very interesting, and so I remind that we are going to upload the recorded version of this on our YouTube channel. Please revisit it there. So as I say, let me take this opportunity once again to thank you for such a brilliant talk, and we hope that, to use this data for our research in the future. Thank you. And for everyone else, have a nice day.